Picture this. You're 77 years old, struggling to breathe with chronic lung disease, and you'll wake up in the middle of the night gasping for air because someone unplugged your oxygen machine. Not because of an emergency, not because of an accident, but because they wanted to save $20 on the electric bill. When I discovered who did it and why, I realized they had picked the wrong grandmother to mess with. Before we begin, let me know in the comments what city you're watching from, and don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10 at the end. My name is Magnolia, but everyone calls me Maggie. I'm 77 years old, and I've lived in the same house in Georgia for 48 years. My husband Buster passed away 9 years ago, leaving me with our beautiful 3-bedroom home, a modest pension, and unfortunately, a lung condition that requires me to be on oxygen therapy 24 hours a day. Now, I know what you're thinking. Poor old lady, all alone, struggling with her health. But let me tell you something, sugar. I didn't survive running my own catering business for 35 years, raise 4 children, and bury a husband just to be pushed around by anyone. I've got fire in my belly and steel in my spine, even if my lungs don't work like they used to. My catering business wasn't just some little side hustle either. Walker's Fine Catering was the go-to company for weddings, corporate events, and political fundraisers throughout 3 counties. I built that business from scratch, starting with nothing but a borrowed commercial mixer and a dream. By the time I retired at 68, I had 12 full-time employees and a reputation for never missing a deadline, never compromising on quality, and never letting anyone walk all over me. That reputation served me well in business, and it served me well in life. When Buster got sick with cancer, I fought the insurance companies tooth and nail to get him the best treatment available. When the city tried to rezone our neighborhood to put in a strip mall, I organized the entire block and we stopped them cold. When a contractor tried to overcharge me for roof repairs after Hurricane Debbie, I had my lawyer send him a letter that made him refund every penny and write me a formal apology. So when people see me now, a small woman with silver hair pulling an oxygen tank behind me wherever I go, they make assumptions. They think I'm fragile. They think I'm helpless. They think I'm someone who can be taken advantage of without consequences. That's their first mistake. 3 months ago, my youngest son, Phoenix, and his wife, Starla, moved in with me. Now, Phoenix had always been my baby in the family, the dreamer of the family. While his older siblings went into practical careers, teaching, nursing, accounting, Phoenix bounced from one get-rich-quick scheme to another. He tried everything from selling insurance to flipping houses to starting a food truck business that lasted exactly 6 weeks. At 42 years old, he still had the same optimistic smile and big plans that had charmed me since he was 5. The problem was, none of those plans ever seemed to work out. And Starla, well, Starla was something else entirely. I first met her at their wedding 3 years ago. She was Phoenix's 3rd wife, a bottle blonde with fake nails and opinions about everything. During their wedding reception, she complained about the flowers, the music, the food, and the venue, all of which I had helped pay for. She also made several snide comments about how some people didn't know how to dress appropriately for formal occasions, while looking directly at my sister Rosemary, who was wearing a perfectly lovely dress from JCPenney. But Phoenix was happy, and I've learned over the years that sometimes you have to bite your tongue for the sake of family peace. So I smiled, nodded, and kept my opinions to myself. Now they were having financial troubles again. Phoenix had been laid off from his latest job, something in sales, though I was never quite clear on what he was selling. Starla claimed she was between opportunities, though as far as I could tell, she'd never held a steady job for more than 6 months in her entire adult life. They came to me with tears in their eyes and sob stories about losing their apartment. They promised it would be temporary, just until Phoenix found steady work and they could get back on their feet. As their family, how could I say no? I offered to let them live rent-free in my extra bedrooms if they'd help with groceries and household expenses. It seemed like a fair arrangement. They'd have a roof over their heads, and I'd have some company and help around the house. At 77, with my oxygen machine and limited mobility, I thought having younger people around might actually be nice. I could teach Starla some of my famous recipes, maybe pass down some family cooking secrets. Phoenix could help with yard work and home maintenance projects that were getting harder for me to manage on my own. We could be a real family again, supporting each other through difficult times. Little did I know, I was inviting wolves into my home. But they had no idea they were about to discover what happens when you mess with a woman who built an empire from nothing and has spent decades dealing with people who underestimate her capabilities. You see, when you've been in business as long as I have, you develop certain instincts about people. You learn to read between the lines, to notice the small details that reveal their true character. You become skilled at spotting trouble before it fully reveals itself. During those first few days after Phoenix and Starla moved in, I noticed little things that didn't quite add up. The way Starla's eyes would dart around my living room like she was taking inventory of my possessions. How she'd ask seemingly innocent questions about my finances, my insurance policies, my medical expenses. The way Phoenix would avoid direct eye contact when talking about his job search efforts. I've seen these behaviors before in people who were trying to take advantage of my catering business. The clients who would try to negotiate down my prices after the event was over. The suppliers who would attempt to overcharge me because they thought I was just a sweet old lady who didn't understand business. But I always understood more than they realized. I kept detailed records, asked pointed questions, and never signed a contract without reading every word twice. That's how you survive in business for 35 years without getting cheated or taken advantage of. Those same instincts were telling me something not quite right about Phoenix and Starla's sudden appearance in my life. But I pushed those concerns aside because I wanted to believe the best about my own family. I wanted to trust that blood meant something, that the son I had raised would never deliberately hurt me. Sometimes being optimistic about family can be your biggest weakness. And sometimes that weakness can nearly get you killed.
For the first month, things seemed to be going reasonably well on the surface. Phoenix left the house every morning with his resume folder, claiming he was going to job interviews and following up on leads. He'd return in the evening with stories about potential opportunities and promising conversations with hiring managers. Starla spent her days supposedly applying for positions online, though I noticed she spent an awful lot of time scrolling through social media and watching reality TV shows. When I'd ask about her job search progress, she'd give vague answers about waiting to hear back from employers or researching different companies. But I started noticing small changes around the house that made me increasingly uncomfortable. The grocery bills were significantly higher than expected, even accounting for feeding 2 additional people. Items would mysteriously disappear, nothing major at first, just small things like my expensive hand lotion, gourmet coffee beans, or the premium toilet paper I kept stocked for guests. When I'd ask about missing items, they'd shrug and suggest maybe I'd used more than I remembered, or perhaps I'd simply misplaced things. "You know how it is when you get older, Maggie," Starla would say with fake concern. "Memory isn't what it used to be." My electric bill became the first major red flag that something was seriously wrong. For 48 years, it had consistently averaged around $65 per month. I kept my thermostat at a reasonable 72 degrees year-round, used energy-efficient appliances, and was generally conscious about not wasting electricity. But suddenly, dramatically, it jumped to $95 in their first month, then $110 the following month. By the third month, it had reached $132, more than double my normal usage. I figured the increase was simply due to having extra people in the house, more long showers, additional laundry loads, lights left on in rooms throughout the day, electronic devices constantly charging. I didn't complain about the additional expense because family helps family, and a few extra dollars on utilities seemed like a reasonable price for companionship and assistance. But then Starla started making increasingly pointed comments about my oxygen machine, and that's when the situation took a much darker turn. "That contraption runs constantly day and night. Do you have any idea how much electricity those medical devices consume? I researched it online. Some of them can add $50 to $70 per month to your electric bill." I patiently explained that the oxygen wasn't optional or negotiable. My pulmonologist, Dr. Rodriguez, had prescribed it after multiple sleep studies and blood oxygen tests, showing my levels dropping dangerously low, especially at night when lying flat made breathing even more difficult. "But do you really need it running 24 hours a day?" she pressed, adopting that fake concern tone she used when she wanted something. "You seem to breathe just fine during the day when you're moving around. Maybe you've developed a psychological dependence on it over time, like a security blanket." The suggestion that my life-saving medical equipment was some kind of emotional crutch made my blood pressure spike dangerously high, but I kept my voice calm and educational. "Starla, this isn't like reading glasses that might be optional. Dr. Rodriguez conducted extensive testing. Without supplemental oxygen, my blood oxygen saturation drops below 80%, which can cause serious organ damage." She rolled her eyes dismissively like I was being unnecessarily dramatic about a minor inconvenience. "Doctors overprescribe everything nowadays. It's all about maximizing profits from Medicare on insurance companies. My aunt had one of those CPAP machines for sleep apnea, and when she finally weaned herself off it, she felt healthier and more energetic than ever." I wanted to explain that sleep apnea and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease were completely different medical conditions requiring different treatments. But I could see there was no point in trying to educate someone who had already made up her mind. The complaints and criticism continued relentlessly over the following weeks. Every time Starla walked past my concentrator, she'd mutter something under her breath about unnecessary medical equipment or wasting money on electricity. She started timing how many hours my machine ran daily and calculating the supposed cost, writing figures on small pieces of paper and leaving them strategically where I'd find them. She even printed articles from questionable health websites about oxygen dependency and medical device addiction, leaving them on my kitchen counter where I couldn't possibly miss them. These articles claim that many elderly people became psychologically addicted to medical devices they didn't really need, and that gradual withdrawal could improve their independence and overall health. Phoenix seemed increasingly uncomfortable with his wife's obsession with my medical equipment. Maybe we should focus on finding jobs and cutting expenses in other ways, he'd suggest weekly whenever she launched into another tirade about the electric bill. But Starla was like a terrier with a bone once she latched onto an idea. She'd found her scapegoat for their financial difficulties and their inability to save money for their own apartment. In her mind, my oxygen machine had become the villain preventing them from achieving financial independence. She started making suggestions about reducing my usage just as an experiment to see if I really needed it as much as I thought. Maybe just try going without it for a few hours each day, she'd say sweetly. I bet you'd be surprised how well you'd feel without being dependent on machinery all the time. The way she talked about my oxygen concentrator like it was a luxury item rather than life-sustaining medical equipment began to genuinely frighten me. I could see the resentment building in her eyes every time she looked at it. She was working herself into a state of righteous anger about electricity costs and my supposed wastefulness. Looking back now, all the warning signs were clearly visible. The growing hostility towards my medical needs, the constant complaints about money, the way she'd unplug other devices around the house to save electricity while pointedly leaving my oxygen machine running. She was building up psychological justification for something terrible. But I never imagined someone would actually be willing to endanger an elderly person's life over $20 or $30 in monthly electricity costs. I thought even someone as selfish as Starla would draw the line at risking another person's health and safety. I was catastrophically wrong about that assumption, and I almost paid for that misjudgment with my life. What I didn't realize at the time was that Starla wasn't just complaining about electricity costs out of general frustration. She was systematically building a case in her mind to justify what she was planning to do. Every comment about unnecessary medical equipment, every calculation of supposed costs, every article about oxygen dependency. It was all preparation for crossing a line that should never be crossed. I should have recognized the pattern from my business days. I'd seen similar behavior from competitors who were preparing to undercut my catering contracts. They'd start by questioning the necessity of my services, suggesting that clients were overpaying for unnecessary extras, planting seeds of doubt about whether they really needed everything I provided. But this wasn't business competition. This was my life they were discussing like it was a budget item that could be eliminated to save money. And I was about to learn just how far they were willing to go to reduce their monthly expenses. Then came the night that changed everything forever. The night that transformed me from a trusting grandmother into someone with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. It was a Tuesday in late October, one of those crisp autumn evenings that usually makes you grateful to be alive. I remember the date specifically because I'd spent the entire day making my famous pumpkin bread for the church bake sale scheduled for Thursday morning. The kitchen counter was covered with golden loaves wrapped in plastic wrap, and the whole house smelled like cinnamon, nutmeg, and vanilla extract. I'd gone to bed around 10 o'clock, following my usual nighttime routine that had become second nature over the past 3 years since starting oxygen therapy. I checked that my concentrator was running properly and quietly, verified that my backup portable tank was nearby and fully charged, and made sure my nasal cannula was positioned comfortably for sleeping. Everything seemed perfectly normal and peaceful as I settled into bed with the mystery novel I'd been reading. The house was quiet. Phoenix and Starla had gone to their room an hour earlier, and I felt secure, knowing my oxygen was flowing steadily to help me breathe through the night. I woke up around 2 in the morning feeling like I was drowning on dry land, gasping and clawing at the air like a fish that had been pulled out of water and left to suffocate. You know that terrifying feeling when you're swimming underwater and you stay down just a little too long? That desperate, overwhelming need for air that makes your chest burn and your heart race uncontrollably? That's exactly how I felt, except I was lying in my own bed with what should have been life-saving oxygen flowing directly into my nose through the cannula. My chest felt constricted and tight, like someone had wrapped steel bands around my ribs and was slowly tightening them with each passing second. Every breath was a monumental struggle, a wheezing, gasping effort that barely seemed to bring any relief or improvement to my condition. I could feel my heart pounding so violently that it seemed like it might burst right out of my chest. The panic was overwhelming and all-consuming. When you can't breathe properly, every other thought disappears except the primal, desperate need for oxygen. Your brain goes into pure survival mode and nothing else matters except getting air into your lungs somehow. In my desperation, I reached for my nasal cannula, the little plastic tube that delivers oxygen from the machine directly to my nose. I could feel it was still properly positioned, but something was terribly wrong. There was no gentle flow of air, no cool sensation of oxygen entering my nostrils, absolutely nothing. With shaking, trembling hands, I followed the tubing from my nose down to where it connected to my oxygen concentrator beside the bed. That's when I realized with growing horror that the machine was completely silent. No gentle humming sound, no blinking indicator lights, no slight vibration from the motor. It was dead quiet, which meant it was completely shut off. But that couldn't be right. I had checked it carefully before going to sleep, just like I did every night without exception. Heart pounding dangerously fast and struggling desperately to catch my breath, I reached over and turned on my bedside lamp with fingers that wouldn't stop shaking. The sudden light made my eyes water, but I could see clearly what had happened to my life-saving equipment. My oxygen concentrator wasn't just turned off, it was completely unplugged from the wall outlet. But this definitely wasn't an accident or random mechanical failure. The plug hadn't just fallen out or come loose from normal vibration or movement. Someone had deliberately pulled it from the electrical outlet and coiled the power cord neatly on the floor beside my bed, like they were tidying up after completing a specific assigned task. Someone had intentionally disconnected my life-saving medical equipment while I was sleeping and completely vulnerable. I crawled out of bed on my hands and knees. I was far too short of breath and dizzy to stand up safely, and plugged my machine back into the wall with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. The familiar humming sound as it powered up and began producing oxygen was honestly the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard in my 77 years of life. Within seconds, blessed oxygen was flowing through my nose again, and gradually, very slowly, my breathing began to ease and my heart rate started to return to something approaching normal. But the fear remained, cold and sharp in my chest like a broken piece of glass that wouldn't dislodge. As I sat there on the floor of my bedroom, waiting for my body to recover from the trauma and terror, one frightening question kept running through my mind like a broken record. Who would do such a thing to me? And more importantly, why would they want to endanger my life? My first instinct was to assume it had been some kind of accident. Maybe someone was cleaning my room earlier and accidentally unplugged it without realizing the potential consequences. Maybe there had been an electrical surge or power fluctuation that caused it to shut off unexpectedly. Maybe I had somehow dislodged it myself during sleep, though that seemed highly unlikely given my limited mobility and oxygen tubing that restricts movement. I don't toss and turn much during the night. Someone had come into my room while I was sleeping and defenseless and deliberately unplugged my oxygen machine, knowing full well that it could seriously endanger my life. Someone in my house, someone I had welcomed with open arms and trusted completely, had tried to hurt me. I sat there on my bedroom floor for probably 30 or 40 minutes, oxygen flowing steadily into my nose, trying to process the reality and implications of what had happened. The sense of betrayal felt almost worse than the physical fear and panic I had experienced. This wasn't a stranger breaking into my house to rob me or harm me. This was someone I had opened my home to, someone I was helping financially, someone who lived under my roof and ate at my table every single day. As the first light of dawn began to filter through my bedroom windows, I made a crucial decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to confront anyone immediately about what had happened. I wasn't going to make direct accusations or demand explanations right away. Instead, I was going to watch and listen very carefully. If someone in my house was willing to endanger my life for unknown reasons, I needed to understand exactly who was responsible and what their motivations were before I decided how to respond appropriately. I needed to know precisely what I was dealing with before I made my next strategic move. Little did I know, the truth would be even worse and more shocking than anything I could have imagined.
The next morning, I acted like nothing unusual had happened during the night. I made breakfast as usual, scrambled eggs with sharp cheddar cheese, crispy bacon, and fresh buttermilk biscuits straight from the oven, and chatted pleasantly with Phoenix and Starla about their plans for the day ahead. But underneath my calm exterior, I was watching their faces intently, looking for any sign of guilt, nervousness, or knowledge about what had happened to my oxygen machine. Phoenix seemed perfectly normal, maybe a little distracted, but that wasn't unusual for him. He was always thinking about his next big business opportunity or worrying about their mounting financial problems. He ate his breakfast quietly, scrolled through job listings on his phone, and kissed my cheek goodbye before leaving with his folder of resumes. Starla, on the other hand, seemed almost unusually cheerful and upbeat for someone who usually complained about everything from the weather to my coffee. She complimented my biscuits enthusiastically, asked if I needed anything from the grocery store, and even offered to help load the dishwasher after breakfast, something she typically avoided. Her behavior struck me as distinctly odd. She was being nicer to me than she had been in weeks, almost like she was overcompensating for something she felt guilty about. If she had tried to endanger my life the night before, she was certainly doing an excellent job of acting completely innocent. I spent that entire day doing what I do best, observing people carefully and listening to everything they said when they thought I wasn't paying attention. You don't run a successful catering business for 35 years without learning how to read people's true intentions accurately. I positioned myself strategically in different parts of the house throughout the day, finding excuses to be near Phoenix and Starla when they thought I was out of earshot. I pretended to take my usual afternoon nap in my recliner, but kept my ears open for conversations in other rooms. I spent extra time in my home office, supposedly paying monthly bills and organizing paperwork, but actually straining to hear what they were discussing in the kitchen and living room. I even found reasons to putter around in the garden outside the windows where they like to sit and talk privately. That evening, around 8 o'clock, my patience and careful surveillance were finally rewarded with information that made my blood run cold. I was in my home office, supposedly reviewing my monthly pension statements, but actually listening intently to the low-voiced conversation happening in the kitchen. Phoenix and Starla were talking while they cleaned up after dinner, probably thinking the sound of running water and clinking dishes would cover their words. "I'm telling you, Phoenix, that oxygen machine is costing us an absolute fortune every single month," Starla was saying in that sharp, frustrated tone she got when she was angry about money. "I did research online today. Those concentrators use about 350 watts continuously, running 24 hours a day. That's literally like having 5 full-size refrigerators running constantly. Starla, she needs that machine to breathe properly and stay alive. What if something serious happens to her if we mess with her medical equipment?" My heart started racing as I realized they weren't talking about a hypothetical situation. They were discussing something they had already done or were actively planning to do. "Look at her during the day. She breathes perfectly fine when she's up and active. I think she doesn't even actually need that machine at night when she's sleeping. She's probably just gotten psychologically dependent on it over the years, like an addiction. My Aunt Cheryl had one of those CPAP machines for snoring, and her doctor eventually said she was basically addicted to the feeling of pressurized air." "I don't know, Starla. It seems really dangerous to mess with someone's prescribed medical equipment." "Look, Phoenix, we're supposed to be saving money so we can get our own apartment, right? We're supposed to be contributing to household expenses. But how can we do that when she's running up the electric bill with unnecessary medical equipment that probably adds $50 or $60 monthly?" My blood pressure spiked as I listened to them discuss my life-saving equipment like it was a luxury item I could simply choose to do without. "But what if she wakes up in the middle of the night and notices what we've done? What if she realizes the machine has been unplugged?" The way he phrased that question, "what we've done," confirmed my worst fears. This wasn't speculation about future actions. This was a discussion about something that had already happened. "Phoenix, she's 77 years old and takes those prescription sleeping pills at exactly 9 o'clock. She sleeps like she's completely unconscious until morning. Besides, if we only unplug it for a few hours during the night when she's deeply asleep, she'll never know the difference. We can plug it back in early in the morning before she wakes up. What if something bad happens to her while it's unplugged? Nothing's going to happen to her. She's been breathing on her own for 77 years without that machine. A few hours at night without extra oxygen won't hurt her at all. Besides, if it really was life or death, wouldn't Medicare have provided backup batteries? The fact that they didn't proves it's not critically important." The casual way she talked about the potential consequences made me feel physically sick. This woman was willing to gamble with my life over $20 or $30 monthly in electricity costs. "Look," Starla continued, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. "We already tested it last night, and everything worked out perfectly fine. I unplugged it around midnight when she was sound asleep and plugged it back in around 5 in the morning before she woke up. She never even stirred or noticed anything was different. Harm done.
I had woken up gasping for air, terrified and struggling to breathe, thinking I might die in my own bedroom, and she described it as working out perfectly fine. We can do it just a couple nights each week, maybe Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday nights. That'll cut the electric usage by almost half, and she'll never be the wiser. That's when I decided with absolute certainty that they had messed with the wrong grandmother.
I sat in my home office for over an hour after they finished their conversation and went to bed, just staring at my hands and trying to process the full magnitude of what I had discovered. My own son, the baby I had nursed through pneumonia when he was 6 years old, the child I had driven to soccer practice 3 times a week for 8 years, the teenager I had bailed out of jail when he got caught spray painting the water tower, was now willing to let his wife endanger my life to save pocket change on electricity. This same boy who used to crawl into bed with me during thunderstorms because he was afraid of lightning was now discussing the best nights of the week to unplug my life-supporting medical equipment. But you know what happened as I sat there in the dark, processing this ultimate betrayal? The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. And when Magnolia Walker gets genuinely angry about something, things start happening. Big things. I've been underestimated my whole life for various reasons. Because I'm small in stature, because I'm a woman, because I'm elderly, because I need oxygen to breathe. People look at me and think that makes me weak, vulnerable, someone easy to take advantage of without serious consequences. They have absolutely no idea what a catastrophic mistake that kind of thinking represents. I spent the next 3 days observing Phoenix and Starla like a wildlife researcher studying dangerous predators in their natural habitat. Phoenix would leave the house every morning around 9, supposedly to look for employment opportunities, but I started timing his trips with the stopwatch function on my phone. He'd be gone for maybe 2 hours maximum, then come back smelling like beer and cigarettes, looking more like he'd been drowning his sorrows than actively pursuing job leads. Starla spent the majority of her time planted on my living room couch, binge-watching reality television shows and scrolling through social media on her phone. But the really interesting development was the sudden increase in package deliveries to my house. Amazon trucks, UPS deliveries, FedEx packages, sometimes 2 or 3 per day, all addressed to Starla Patterson, but delivered to my address. When I asked her about the constant stream of packages, she'd claim they were samples or gifts from friends or things I ordered before we moved in here. But I could see through the windows that these weren't small sample packages. These were substantial boxes containing expensive items, designer handbags, jewelry, skincare products, clothing, electronics. I was pretty sure they couldn't afford this kind of shopping spree, especially since neither of them had steady income, which made me wonder exactly how these purchases were being funded. But I wasn't just observing their daily habits and suspicious behavior. I was also doing some very important research and making some very strategic phone calls. You see, the thing about being 77 years old is that people assume you don't understand modern technology, legal procedures, or business matters. They think you're helpless and naive about how the world really works. That assumption is their first major mistake when dealing with someone like me. I may be old, but I'm definitely not stupid or helpless. I still have all my mental faculties, decades of business experience, and a network of professional contacts who respect my judgment. My first call was Wesley Brooks, my attorney. Wesley had handled all my business contracts and legal matters back when I ran Walker's Fine Catering, and he'd helped me navigate the complicated legal maze when Buster died and I had to settle his estate. More importantly, Wesley had never once treated me like a confused old lady who didn't understand what was happening around her. "Wesley," I said when he answered his private line, "I need some professional advice about elder abuse laws, tenant rights, and eviction procedures." Elder abuse? His voice immediately sharpened with concern and attention. "Maggie, are you in some kind of serious trouble? Do you need immediate help?" I explained the entire situation methodically, the oxygen machine incidents, the overheard conversations about deliberately endangering my health, the mysterious packages, and the theft of small items around the house, and my growing suspicions about their true intentions. He listened without interrupting, occasionally asking clarifying questions about dates, times, and specific details. When I finished my account, there was a long pause before he responded. "Well, Maggie, what they're doing could potentially constitute several serious criminal charges: reckless endangerment of an elderly person, elder abuse, theft, fraud, and possibly even attempted murder, depending on how aggressive the prosecutor wants to be. But we'll need solid evidence to build a case. Can you prove beyond reasonable doubt that they deliberately unplugged your oxygen machine?" I smiled grimly. "Wesley, that's exactly what I was hoping you'd say, because I have a plan. I went online, yes, I know how to use the internet competently, despite what my children might think, and ordered myself a small security camera system. One of those tiny devices that looks like a smoke detector, but records everything in high definition directly to your smartphone. The whole system cost me $49 plus shipping, and it was absolutely the best money I ever spent in my entire life. My neighbor's grandson Tyler installed it for me the next afternoon. Tyler's a sweet 20-year-old kid who's studying computer science at the community college and always treats me with genuine respect. I told him I was worried about break-ins in the neighborhood because there had been some suspicious activity lately and I wanted some peace of mind about security. Miss Maggie, this camera system has motion detection technology and infrared night vision capabilities. It'll start recording automatically whenever someone enters your bedroom, and you can watch the footage live on your phone or review it later. I'm setting up the app on your smartphone right now. I positioned the camera to give me a perfect view of my entire bedroom, with special focus on my oxygen concentrator and the electrical outlet it plugged into. Then I started keeping a detailed written log like the meticulous businesswoman I had always been. Every morning, I'd check my oxygen machine and note whether it had been unplugged during the night. I'd document exactly how I felt physically, any breathing difficulties I experienced, my energy levels throughout the day. I started taking photographs of my oxygen saturation levels with the little finger monitor Dr. Rodriguez had provided for home monitoring. But that wasn't nearly enough for what I had in mind. I wanted them to understand exactly who they were dealing with. Little did they know, I was about to show them what happens when you mess with someone who built a successful business empire from absolutely nothing and now has absolutely nothing left to lose. They thought they were dealing with a helpless, confused old lady who would quietly disappear without anyone asking difficult questions. They had no idea they were about to face someone with 40 years of business connections, legal knowledge, and the kind of ruthless determination that comes from surviving everything life can throw at you.
My security camera system proved to be worth its weight in gold. Over the next 2 weeks, it captured Starla unplugging my oxygen machine 4 more times, always following the same pattern. She'd creep into my bedroom around midnight when she thought I was deeply asleep, deliberately disconnect my life-saving equipment, and then sneak back in around 5 in the morning to plug it back in before I supposedly woke up. Each incident was recorded in crystal clear, high-definition video that showed her face, her deliberate actions, and the timestamps proving this was planned and systematic rather than accidental. But that wasn't all my camera system caught during its surveillance operation. I discovered that Starla wasn't just unplugging my oxygen machine to save money on electricity. She was also systematically going through my personal belongings whenever she thought I was napping, out of the house, or otherwise distracted. I watched in growing horror as she opened my jewelry box, photographed my pieces with her phone, and even tried on my late mother's pearl necklace, the one I had always planned to leave to my granddaughter as a family heirloom. She went through my mail methodically, taking pictures of my bank statements, medical bills, insurance information, and pension documentation. She opened my dresser drawers and pawed through my personal items like she was shopping at a garage sale. She even had the audacity to go into my home office and photograph sensitive documents from my desk, including detailed information about my pension payments, life insurance policies, and investment account balances. But Phoenix wasn't innocent in this systematic violation of my privacy and trust either. The camera also caught my own son stealing from me on multiple occasions. I watched with my own eyes as he took $20 from my purse one afternoon while I was working in the garden. Then $40 from my emergency cash stash that I kept in the kitchen cookie jar for household emergencies. When he thought I was completely oblivious, he went into my home office and photographed my bank statements and financial documents just like his wife had done. They weren't just trying to save money on electricity bills. They were systematically gathering financial information and stealing cash so they could rob me blind. I made multiple copies of all the video footage and stored them in different locations for security. I burned several DVDs of the evidence, saved digital files to multiple USB drives, and uploaded everything to a secure cloud storage account that Tyler had helped me set up. If something happened to me under suspicious circumstances, the evidence would still exist and be accessible to law enforcement. But the most chilling and terrifying discovery was still to come. I had installed 2 additional cameras by this point, one strategically positioned in the living room and another in the kitchen area. I told Phoenix and Starla that I'd had a comprehensive security system installed throughout the house because there had been several break-ins reported in our neighborhood recently. They seemed visibly nervous and uncomfortable about the cameras, but couldn't really object or complain without looking suspicious. 3 weeks after the first oxygen machine incident, I overheard a conversation between them that made my blood literally turn to ice water in my veins. I was in my bedroom around 10 o'clock at night, supposedly getting ready for bed, but actually monitoring the live camera feeds on my smartphone app. Phoenix and Starla were in the kitchen talking in hushed, conspiratorial voices while they cleaned up after a late dinner. "This whole plan isn't working fast enough for my liking," Starla was saying with obvious frustration in her voice.
She's 77 years old and dependent on oxygen equipment, but she could potentially live for many more years like this. My grandmother lived to be 93, and she was in much worse physical shape than Maggie is right now. What exactly are you saying, Starla? Phoenix asked, though his tone suggested he already knew what direction this conversation was heading. I'm saying we need to start thinking about the bigger financial picture here. She's sitting on a real gold mine. This house is easily worth $300,000 or more, plus whatever she has accumulated in savings accounts, investments, and insurance policies. But we're stuck here living like charity cases and freeloaders, just waiting around for nature to take its natural course. Starla, you can't possibly be suggesting what I think you're suggesting. I'm not suggesting anything specific or definitive, Phoenix. I'm just pointing out that accidents happen to elderly people all the time. They fall downstairs, they forget to plug in their essential medical equipment, they have sudden heart attacks or unexpected strokes. And when these tragic accidents occur, their loving children and caregivers naturally inherit everything they've worked for. My heart nearly stopped beating as I realized exactly what this woman was talking about. She wasn't just discussing stealing my money or possessions, she was casually talking about murdering me and making it look like a natural death or accident. But what about all those security cameras she installed? Phoenix asked weakly. The cameras are only in the common areas of the house. There aren't any cameras in her bedroom at night where she's most vulnerable. And even if there were cameras everywhere, who's going to seriously question the natural death of a 77-year-old woman with severe lung disease, especially if it appears to be from natural causes or an unfortunate accident? I nearly dropped my phone as I listened to them discuss my potential murder like they were planning a weekend vacation. I still can't believe we're even talking about this, Phoenix said, but his voice was weak and uncertain rather than outraged. Phoenix, listen to me carefully. She could change her will at any time if she gets suspicious about what we're doing. She could decide we're not worthy of an inheritance. She could donate everything to charity or medical research out of spite. But if something unfortunate happens to her soon, while we're still living here and supposedly taking care of her, we're the obvious and natural beneficiaries of her estate. That's when I knew with absolute certainty that they had made the biggest mistake of their entire lives. They thought they were dealing with a helpless, vulnerable victim who would die quietly and conveniently in her sleep. Instead, they had picked a fight with a woman who had survived 7 decades of life's most difficult challenges and now had absolutely nothing left to lose. But what happened next would make them realize their biggest and most costly mistake.
The next morning, I put my carefully planned strategy into action. While they had been scheming and plotting my demise, I had been incredibly busy building an airtight case against them. I had called in every professional favor and personal relationship I'd accumulated over my 48 years of living in this community. Tommy Ramirez, who owns the biggest construction company in 3 counties and whose wedding reception I had catered 15 years ago, arrived at my house at 8 o'clock sharp to change every single lock. New deadbolts on all exterior doors, new door handles with advanced security features, and even a completely new garage door opener with a digital code that only I would know. Amanda Chin, the most respected private investigator in the region and a longtime friend whose office holiday parties I'd catered for over a decade, had delivered a fascinating and deeply disturbing report about my daughter-in-law's background. As it turned out, Starla Renee Patterson had quite an extensive criminal history that Phoenix apparently knew absolutely nothing about. 3 previous marriages, all ending in complete financial ruin for her unfortunate husbands, 2 documented arrests for elder fraud in different states, specifically targeting vulnerable senior citizens in assisted living facilities. A clear pattern of systematically targeting older, financially comfortable people, gaining their trust, and then stealing everything she could get her hands on. My attorney, Wesley Brooks, had prepared much more than just a simple police report. He had drafted a completely new last will and testament, entirely removing Phoenix from any inheritance whatsoever and establishing a charitable trust that would donate my entire estate to the American Lung Association upon my death. The paperwork was already signed, properly witnessed, and officially filed with the county courthouse. But the most satisfying part of my plan was the trap I was about to spring on them. At 10 o'clock that morning, I called Phoenix into the living room for what I announced would be an important family discussion. Starla wandered in too, probably hoping to hear about some household errand she could find an excuse to avoid helping with. I need to talk to both of you about something very important, I said, keeping my voice sweet and innocent as honey.
What's going on, Mom? Phoenix asked, settling onto the couch next to his wife with a curious expression. Well, I've been thinking seriously about your financial situation, and I've decided I want to help you both get back on your feet permanently. So I've been working closely with my lawyer to restructure my estate planning, and I want to give you an early inheritance to solve your money problems. You should have seen their faces absolutely light up like Christmas morning and 4th of July combined. Starla actually sat forward on the couch, suddenly paying intense attention for the first time in weeks. Phoenix smiled genuinely for the first time since they'd moved in. "That's incredibly generous and thoughtful of you, Maggie," Starla said, using her fake sweet voice that she reserved for special occasions. "We really appreciate everything you've done for us during this difficult time." "Oh, don't thank me just yet," I said calmly, pulling out a thick manila folder stuffed with official-looking documents. You see, before I can legally transfer any significant assets, Wesley insisted on conducting a complete security and legal review of my household situation. You know how lawyers are. They have to dot every I and cross every T to protect everyone involved. I opened the folder dramatically and pulled out the first batch of printed screenshots from my security camera system. Imagine my complete surprise when Wesley's thorough investigation turned up these clear images of someone systematically going through my personal papers and photographing my financial information without my knowledge or permission. The photographs showed Starla, in perfect clarity, rifling through my mail and using her phone to take pictures of my bank statements and medical bills. Her face went completely white as paper. And these additional images of someone taking money from my purse and my kitchen emergency fund. More photographs, these ones showing Phoenix clearly in the act of stealing cash from various locations around my house. His hands started shaking visibly. But the most interesting and disturbing discovery was this video footage from my bedroom. I pulled out my tablet and played the security video for them. There was Starla, clear as daylight, sneaking into my bedroom at 2 a.m. and deliberately unplugging my oxygen concentrator from the wall. Now, Wesley tells me this evidence constitutes several serious felony charges: elder abuse, theft, reckless endangerment, and possibly attempted murder, depending on how aggressive the prosecutor decides to be. They both sat completely frozen, staring at the overwhelming evidence of their crimes spread across my coffee table like a prosecutor's case file. But here's the thing, I'm still willing to give you that inheritance I mentioned earlier. Hope flickered desperately in their eyes. Your inheritance is this. You have exactly 1 hour to pack your belongings and get out of my house, forever. If you're still here in 60 minutes, I'm calling the police and pressing full charges for everything you've done to me. Mom, you don't understand what's really happening here, Phoenix started to say desperately. Oh, I understand perfectly, Phoenix. I understand that you've been stealing from me, endangering my life, and planning my death. Yes, Starla, I heard that fascinating conversation too. The one about how accidents happen to old people and how convenient it would be if I died while you were living here as my supposed caregivers. Starla jumped to her feet like she'd been stung by a wasp. You can't prove any of that. Those recordings were made without our consent. They're not even legal evidence. I smiled sweetly at her. Honey, this is my house. I can record anything I want in my own home. But you are absolutely right about one thing. I can't prove what you were planning to do to me in the future. I can only prove what you actually did. And what you did is quite enough to send you both to prison for a very long time. You wouldn't do that to your own son, Phoenix said weakly, but his voice betrayed his uncertainty. Watch me carefully, Phoenix. Wesley has already filed a comprehensive police report with all the evidence. The only reason officers aren't here right now arresting both of you is because I asked for 1 hour to handle this situation family style first. But in 57 minutes, this becomes a criminal matter handled by the justice system. That's when Starla completely lost control and showed her true colors. You vindictive old witch! We were trying to help you. Do you have any idea how expensive it is to live with someone who needs constant medical care? We were sacrificing our own comfort and opportunities to take care of you. In stealing my money and unplugging my oxygen machine to save $20. It was just at night when you were sleeping. You breathed perfectly fine during the day. You're being completely dramatic about the whole situation. And there it was, the full confession I needed, recorded on my phone the entire time we'd been talking.
What happened next was absolutely beautiful to watch. They packed frantically, throwing their belongings into garbage bags and suitcases like their lives depended on it. But while they were scrambling to gather their things, more elements of my master plan were falling perfectly into place. Remember those expensive packages Starla had been receiving constantly? I had done some investigating with Amanda Chen's help, and we discovered that all of those purchases were charged to credit cards that Phoenix had opened using my address for the billing statements. They had racked up nearly $8,000 in debt that they couldn't possibly pay back on their non-existent income. I called every single creditor and explained very clearly that they were no longer residents at my address, I was not responsible for any of their debts, and all collection efforts should be redirected to Phoenix's mother's house, his other mother, the one who had been enabling his irresponsible behavior for 42 years. But the financial consequences were just the beginning of their problems. Remember Amanda Chen's background investigation? It turned out that Starla's pattern of elder fraud was much more extensive than even I had realized. She had been married 3 times before Phoenix, and each marriage had ended with her systematically cleaning out her husband's bank accounts and disappearing. She had also been arrested twice for targeting senior citizens in assisted living facilities, convincing them to loan her money for fake emergencies that she never paid back. I called every single one of Starla's previous victims, and they were all eager to provide additional evidence and testimony about her criminal behavior patterns. Wesley now had enough documentation to ensure that Starla would face charges in multiple states. Her days of preying on vulnerable older people were finally coming to an end. As they loaded the last of their belongings into their beat-up Honda, I stood on my front porch and watched them drive away for the last time. Tommy Ramirez was there too, putting the finishing touches on my upgraded security system. "You sure you're going to be okay all by yourself, Miss Maggie?" Tommy asked with genuine concern. "Tommy, honey, I haven't felt this good and secure in years." 3 weeks later, Phoenix called me crying and begging me to reconsider and take them back. It turned out that living with Starla's mother wasn't working out so well for them. Apparently, Starla's mom had strict house rules: no staying out late drinking, no lying around the house all day watching television, no stealing from family members, and absolutely no criminal behavior. Who would have thought such reasonable expectations would be so difficult for them to meet? "Mom, please give us another chance," Phoenix begged through his tears. "We made terrible mistakes. We're genuinely sorry for everything. Can't you find it in your heart to forgive us?" "Phoenix, I've been thinking about forgiveness a great deal lately, and I've come to an important realization. Forgiveness doesn't mean letting people walk all over you or enabling their destructive behavior. It means letting go of anger so you can move forward with your life in peace." "So you'll take us back?" "Oh, absolutely not. I forgive you for being weak and allowing your wife to manipulate you into endangering my life, but I'll never trust either of you again. There's a crucial difference between forgiveness and foolishness. But I'm your son. You were my son when you let your wife unplug my oxygen machine to save $20 on electricity. You were my son when you stole money from my purse and photographed my financial documents. Being my son didn't stop you from betraying me then, and it's not going to save you from the consequences now. I'm changing my phone number after this call," I told him firmly. "Don't try to contact me again. If you need to communicate with me for any reason, you can do it through Wesley Brooks, my attorney." And that was the absolute last time I spoke to my youngest son. Now, 8 months later, I'm doing better than I ever imagined possible. My oxygen machine runs 24 hours a day without anyone complaining about electricity costs. I sleep peacefully every night knowing that nobody is going to sneak into my room and endanger my life to save pocket change. I've made wonderful new friends throughout the community. Tommy Ramirez stops by every week to check on me, and his wife Maria brings me homemade tamales that are almost as delicious as mine used to be. Amanda Chen's daughter started college this year, and I'm helping pay her tuition expenses. It turns out that investing in young people who respect their elders is infinitely more satisfying than supporting grown adults who don't. Word is spread throughout town about what happened with Phoenix and Starla. Now everyone knows that Magnolia Walker might be 77 and dependent on oxygen, but she's definitely not someone you want to mess with. I get invited to more social events and community activities now than I have in years. People respect someone who stands up for themselves, especially when it requires real courage.
As for Phoenix and Starla, last I heard through the neighborhood grapevine, they'd moved to another state after Starla's mother threw them out for stealing from her too. They're probably searching for their next victim right now, some other trusting family member who will mistake their sob story for genuine need and honest intentions. But they'll never forget the grandmother who taught them that actions have serious consequences even when you think you're dealing with someone too old and sick to fight back effectively. The lesson here is simple and universal. Never underestimate someone just because they're elderly or have health problems. We've survived decades of life's most difficult challenges, raised children, built careers, and buried loved ones. We're much tougher than we appear, and we know far more than you think. And most importantly, we absolutely will not tolerate being disrespected, stolen from, or endangered in our own homes by people we've shown nothing but kindness and generosity. So the next time you think about taking advantage of an older person, remember my story carefully. Remember that the sweet grandmother you're planning to scam might just be a retired business owner with security cameras, an excellent lawyer, and absolutely nothing left to lose. They messed with the wrong grandmother, and they learned that lesson the hardest way possible.